Good evening, listeners. You're tuned in to the ghostly broadcast, Paranormal Station. I am your host, Timothy. I speak across the airwaves from my quiet farm where the good soil grows crops in the supernatural mist. We share our spaces in this world with others close to us. Maybe not so close in acquaintanceship, but definitely in proximity. For the most part, we get along amicably with our neighbors. But, as we shall hear tonight, there are times when our neighbors harbor ill will and malice. Sometimes it can be mundane human disagreements. We'll hear testimonies from Asia tonight, where contributors recount their haunted brushes with those living next door. Our first testimony. Dear Timothy, my name is Yuto, and my family and I live in Takayama. It's a small enough city with plenty of old historic buildings that are well preserved. It was weird when our neighbors decided to build their own home on the plot next to ours, precisely in the old Edo houses. There were plenty on sale in the area that they could have bought for less money. But when I met them, they'd insisted that they wanted their own, newly built home. They seemed friendly, amicable, and very neighborly. Me and my husband would make idle chit-chat, and my wife and his seemed to get along. They didn't have any kids yet, but said they planned on having some once they were settled. In truth, they seemed like the perfect newlywed couple, if not a little bit on the snob side, showcasing whatever privileged background they'd been brought up in. The only complaint I could think of was the sounds of work at night. My wife, our 2 kids, and I heard hammering nails, moving furniture, and shoveling at one point. We assumed it was all part of their moving process. I even asked the husband about it, and he confirmed as much. I'm so sorry if you heard all that. I'm just trying to finish everything, and that's the only time I get to work on the house, he explained. It was a decent enough alibi. I knew the guy worked hard in the city and was gone for a lot of the day. I asked if he could try to at least not work after 10 p.m., so my kids and I could get some sleep. He was very apologetic and agreed to that. After the conversation, we would hear him working until the clock struck 10. Then, it was deathly silent. Weeks turned to months, and life carried on. Right up until the last night, we saw our neighbors. I was working late, so I'd called ahead and told my wife not to wait for me, and just put the kids to bed. Our door was wide open when I got home, and no one was there. I walked into our empty home and called out to my family. No one answered. Then the familiar voice of my neighbor came from behind me. Standing in the doorway, looking disheveled and sweaty, my neighbor tells me he knows where my family is. Your wife thought there might be a gas leak. They're at our house with us. Come, I'll take you to them, he softly explained. That doesn't sound like Hannah. She'd have called or at least texted, I said. My friend, I assure you, they're safe with me and my wife at my house, he calmly stated, but something about his insistence seemed off. He had never spoken like this before, and I saw something in his eyes. A malice that twisted his face ever so slightly into an uncanny mask of his usual, bright demeanor. Isamu, I said, where is my family? He knew his game was up and he sprang towards me. His face scrunched up in scowls and gnashing teeth as he grappled at me. I threw him off as hard as I could. He fell backwards and lost his footing. He tumbled off his feet and struck his head on the corner of our table. I watched his eyes blankly stare at nothing as blood pooled underneath his limp body. I dashed over to his house. When I arrived, my wife and 2 sons were tied up, bound and gagged over a large hole dug out in their living room. When my neighbor's wife saw me and not her husband, she dropped to the floor and begged our forgiveness. We called the police, and wife confessed to everything. She and her late husband had been planning on ritually burying my entire family alive. It was based on ancient and defunct Shinto beliefs to bring good fortune and standing to their new home by making us a part of it forever. I'm glad they never got to finish what they'd started on my family, but my wife and sons have been traumatized. Even I've been perturbed by this whole sorry mess. After we move to our new home, we can put it all behind us and move on. Kind regards, Yuto. Thank you for that testimony, Yuto. It appears that karma is at work here if you believe in such things. I wish you and your family the best. Our next testimony is from Seoul. Dear Timothy, I'm Nari, and I've lived in an apartment block in Seoul for 2 years. I managed to get the place cheap as it's mainly for elderly residents and retirees. I'm one of around 2 or 3 people below the age of 40 in this place. It's a comfortable building, quiet and out of the way, where people generally keep to themselves. The only thing I didn't factor in was how deaf most residents were. If you think young folks are bad for blasting music into the silent hours, spare a thought for those living with the elderly. They let everyone know what shows they're watching, and don't get me started on what some of them like to watch. Old men still want to watch porn, and I have heard a lot coming through the walls. The worst was my immediate next-door neighbor. Poor little old lady with no family left to keep her company. I felt terrible the first time I knocked on her door to ask if she could turn her TV down. She apologized and said she'd keep it down during the evening and turn it off at a reasonable time. True to her word, the TV would be off by 10 p.m. sharp. After a while, we got to know each other. We would pass on the stairs and hallways, and she explained that she watches TV because she can't sleep. I suggested some books might help. She could even get headphones and listen to audio versions. It wasn't long before we started to chat about what we'd been reading. I told her that if I was going out and coming home late, I'd let her know so she could watch TV without worrying about keeping me up. It worked out great until I got home one night, and I could hear the TV booming through the walls from the hallway outside. I knocked on her door and announced I was home. Usually, she wouldn't come to the door. She'd just turn her TV off a few minutes later, and I'd hear silence. This time, the TV stayed on. I gave it half an hour in case she was watching a show's end, but it kept going. I heard credits roll and an ad break, so I thought she might not have heard me. I knocked pretty hard, but she was still rather deaf. I knocked on the door again and didn't get an answer. I started getting worried, so I called the building manager. He showed up looking pretty angry, but he opened the door to check. My poor neighbor had died in front of the TV. I walked over to her body and gently took the remote from her hand to turn off the deafening TV. My neighbor was lying there with her eyes closed like she was sleeping. Finally, she got the rest she'd been hoping for. No one claimed her ashes after her funeral, so I took them and spread them myself. When I got home that night, I heard her TV playing through the walls with the volume on full. I tried her door, but it was locked. I knocked on the door and asked if someone was in there. No one answered. I tried again, announcing my name and explaining that I was the next-door neighbor. Sure enough, the TV turned off. Silence. The following day, I asked the building manager if anyone had moved next door to me. He said that they were still trying to find a new tenant. But Every night when I came home, my neighbor's television would be on, loudly playing through all the walls. It became a nighttime routine all over again. I'm not inclined to believe in evil spirits. I don't think for one second that my neighbor was a bad person. She was a sweet, lonely old woman. I would knock on her door, call her name, and tell her I was home, and the TV would turn off. All by itself. Kind regards, Nari. Thank you, Nari, for that beautiful testimony. The kindness shown in life and death is more potent than any malice. Our next testimony takes us to Vietnam. Dear Timothy, I was living in Hanoi when I had an experience with a neighbor that shook me so much I ended up moving immediately. She'd moved in next door a few months after me. At first, everything seemed fine. She was quiet. We made idle chit-chat, but nothing more. A few weeks after she moved in, I started hearing noises. A broken glass or plate, pots and pans clattering. It was always so sudden, and in the middle of the night. A simple clatter of commotion, then nothing. I thought she must have been cooking or getting a cup of water at night, and she was clumsy. It all seemed innocuous enough. Then the screaming started. Awful, blood-curdling screams. First time I heard them, it was like a quick shout. I wondered if my neighbor had fallen over or stubbed her toe, because it was like a short wailing sound before it subsided. When it happened again, it was longer and louder. It always stopped after a few minutes, and I let it go on longer than I should have, because I didn't want to be rude, especially if this poor woman was going through some tremendous pain. That's what I initially thought the screaming was about. One night, after a long shift, the screaming starts again. This time she's wailing, crying, and beating on the walls. It was awful, harrowing, painful screams. It went on for so long that it felt like she was in bed with me, screaming into my ears. I got up, marched to her door, and pounded on it. The screaming didn't stop. I knocked again and shouted to her. She answered the door. Standing with a tired, blank face, she asked me what was wrong. She wasn't screaming, but I could still hear it. The wailing and pounding kept on going. Who is that? Are they hurt?" I asked. Her eyes grew wide, and the look she gave terrified me. "You hear it too?" she asked. I was shocked, scared. I didn't know what to do. I ran back to my apartment, and she chased after me. She was screaming at me, saying it over and over again, "You hear it." She was beating and wailing on my door. She sounded entirely different from the cries I could still hear. She sounded insane. Someone called the police for all the commotion, and I heard them drag her away from my door and out of the building. She kept shouting as the sound grew fainter the further away she got. At the same time, the further away she got from me, the quieter the other screams became. A day later, she was released and came home. I was already looking for a new place. Screaming didn't stop, but she didn't try to bother me again. On my last day, as I took one more box of my things down the stairs, she emerged from her doorway and gave me a begging, pleading look. I turned away from her and left. I've never seen her again or heard any more of those ghastly wails. Yours, Lynn. Thank you for that testimony, Lynn. It's perfectly natural to shy away from hauntings. We can only know what we know, and running from the unseen forces of this world is a valid response. Our next testimony comes from China. Dear Timothy, I'm Chow, and I used to live in a block right in the middle of Beijing. Like most friends and colleagues, I lived in a one-room micro-apartment. It wasn't much, but at least it was my own space. I didn't really know any of my neighbors. There were many of them, and I worked long hours, so I was hardly there often enough to talk to anyone. In hindsight, it probably would have helped if I had tried. It was an ordinary night like any other, nothing special or untoward. I got home, crawled into bed, and passed out. The next thing I remember, smoke filled the room. I coughed and spluttered as I tried to breathe through the thick, hot air. I darted to the door, trying to keep below the thickest smoke. When I grabbed the door handle, it seared the skin on my hand. I snatched it back and saw the red, blistering skin. I couldn't get out. The heat rose and I screamed for help. I ran to the window and saw the horrible flames licking up the building. Across from the interior courtyard below, the four sides of the square apartment block were covered in flames. People were in their windows screaming for help. Some of them held children. Some jumped to their deaths. The last thing I saw was the date on my bedside clock, and then I woke up. I was dazed, sweating and half mad. I looked at my burnt hand, finding it healthy and undamaged. The date on my clock was 3 days prior. I knew it wasn't a dream. Dreams are too abstract, disjointed, and hazy. This was real. I felt the fire, the heat, the smoke in my lungs. I had to get out. For the next few days, while I was looking for a new place, any place I could find would do. I would tell everyone I could to get out of the building. I knew they wouldn't believe me, so I lied and said I knew the building inspector. I told them that it was unsafe. I saw a mother and her toddler on the last day before the fire. I begged her to leave for the night, to go and stay with some family somewhere, but she thought I was crazy. She shielded her child from me and ran. With the last of my things packed, I was ushered out the door and sent on my way. I came back that night, at the exact time I had seen on my clock in my nightmare. I wanted to be crazy. I wanted to be wrong about it all. I hope beyond all that it had just been a crazy dream. Fire is an incredible thing to watch. It moves in waves, flickers, and swallows anything with astonishing speed. It was only 10 minutes before the entire building was engulfed. I saw people screaming from their windows, helplessly trying to escape. I wept on the pavement. There was nothing else that I could do. I'd tried to warn as many people as possible, but they wouldn't listen. I don't blame them. I wouldn't have believed me either. Why did I deserve to be warned but not them? Regards, Chow. Thank you, Chow. No one can understand the machinations of the spirits. We don't know why they do what they do. Why do they influence some over others? It is one of the great mysteries we can only bear witness to. This concludes the evening broadcast. I'm your host, Timothy, and you've been listening to Ghostly Broadcast, Paranormal Station. If you enjoyed this dive into unknown interactions with the spirits that neighbor us in the veil beyond, just out of sight, sound, and touch, then consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell icon to be notified of all our latest broadcasts. Good night, dear viewers, and sleep soundly. The spirits wax and wane as I tend to my spectral fields. Until next time.